All right, welcome back to the Powers on Sports podcast. Before we get to our guest, Matt Zemek, let me give you a word from Ticket Smarter and the Ticket Smarter mobile app. If you are out going to a college game this week, whether it's USC, Wisconsin, Bama, Georgia, whatever the game you like is, Texas A&M and Arkansas potentially, Ticket Smarter and the Ticket Smarter mobile app is your place to go. Use my code POWERS10, save you 10 bucks off of 100, or Powers 20 will save you 20 bucks off a $300 purchase. Safe, secure, the best prices on the secondary market. So definitely check out ticketsmarter.com and the TicketSmarter mobile app. You can use my codes as many times as you want, whether it's NFL, whether it's concerts, theater, sporting events, Major League Baseball playoffs coming up. Ticketsmarter.com, Powers 10 and Powers 20 to save you some money at your local sporting venue, wherever you are, all around the country. So, all right, let's bring in Matt Zemek, writer, editor of USA Today Trojan Wire. He's our college football guy. He is dialed in all over the country. We are through 4 weeks. He's also a contributor to the Three Dog Thursday podcast and website. Writes some great game previews every week, and he also hosts his own podcast, the Get Off My Pylon podcast, part of the College Gridiron Coast to Coast podcast network, which I'm a part of with my Florida Football Insiders podcast. But Matt talks about a lot of things West Coast, USC, does a great job covering college football as a whole. So welcome back, Matt Zemek.
Great to be back on your show, Jason. Let's roll.
Let's do it. Let's do it. You're also part of the Mark Rogers Voice of College Football as well, correct?
That is right. We have our USC show. I'm going to be doing it just after we finish up here.
All right.
Yeah. Yes.
Give me a
Full
couple.
boat. It's that year. It's
That's
that
it,
time of
man.
year.
That's it. All right. Through 4 weeks of the college football season, give me a couple of storylines that have caught your attention, national stuff, whatever you want to hit on. Give me a couple of things that have caught your attention through 4 weeks.
Well, we're going to talk about the coaching carousel. I have some stories in mind there, but we'll deal with the coaching carousel I'm in a little bit. So not in terms of non-coaching carousel stuff. One of the things we always do in September, and like this is important, right? We always have to do this as college football analysts. We try and make sense of how good teams really are or aren't. So many instances of that across the country. And I think as we process Michigan beating USC, obviously the game that I was really focused on covering at Trojans Wire, I think the big takeaway is, LSU is not very good. Whereas Texas, it looks like a top tier national title contender. So the point being, Michigan gained so much more value from its Texas game than USC gained from its LSU game. LSU folks were talking up this offensive line with those bookend tackles. Wow, this is going to be one of the greatest offensive lines in LSU history. That has not materialized through 4 weeks. Like LSU struggled against UCLA at home, and Indiana beat UCLA by 29. All right, LSU struggled with UCLA at home in Tiger Stadium in Baton Rouge. I mean, for 35, 40 minutes, LSU could not separate from the Bruins. They needed, 4 full quarters to really get that game under control. So LSU is just not very good. So USC, I mean, it's not as though that's a bad win, but it's not nearly as impressive a win as it felt like at the time. And Michigan getting boat raced by Texas, it's not that Michigan didn't have some flaws and weaknesses. Texas certainly exposed them, but that was more a commentary on Texas being really, really good, being able to go into Ann Arbor and just dominate that game start to finish. USC's nowhere near the level that Texas is. And so USC and Michigan look like two evenly matched teams. They traded punches. They're basically even. And so that's really the lesson that, it wasn't as though Michigan was this awful team. That's why USC went off as a 4.5-point favorite. No, it was Texas was just that much better than Michigan. And USC was not a whole lot better than LSU. It was better, but it wasn't better by a lot. And seeing LSU muddle along and labor and struggle under Brian Kelly, well, so when USC went into Ann Arbor, got punched in the mouth. Certainly, the USC offensive line got dog walked for 3 of the 4 quarters in that game. USC played a really good third quarter up front with its offensive line, but for most of that game, it was Michigan's defensive front pushing USC back, and generally winning that battle. So USC realized it's not as far advanced as it hoped it would be.
When I look at the Big Ten, I see Oregon, Ohio State as the two. I know Oregon came out of the gates a little slow, but I think you're going to see them get better and better here leading up to that monster Ohio State game in October. I don't see a lot of great teams in the Big Ten. I mean, I think USC's in Michigan or in middle of the road. Penn State, we don't know about yet. They've struggled a little bit. They have a big one against Illinois this week. Illinois has had a nice win at Nebraska. We thought Nebraska was going to have a chance to win some games. Indiana. Give me a sense of the Big Ten outside of the top couple teams.
Well, I think the big story, other than Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, is Indiana. Frank Cignetti. I'm thinking about the offensive coordinator,
Right.
Kurt Cignetti. Hired from James Madison. Boy, it seems as though Indiana's really hit a home run with Kurt Cignetti. Like he definitely has everything aligned properly. He knows how to get his players to play the right way,
right,
in terms of force, in terms of style, in terms of consistency. Like, we all know what a well-coached team looks like. Indiana looks like a very, very well-coached team. Like, and just to quickly tie LSU back into this conversation, if LSU and Indiana played this weekend on a neutral field, I would take Indiana. I would pick Indiana over LSU right now. So, like, Indiana is a dark horse right now. Like, Indiana is going to win a bunch of games.
Can they play any defense against a good team?
That's the question which remains. But I think, like, Indiana, I see Indiana winning consistently against the middle and lower tiers of the Big Ten.
Right.
And so that will at least put Indiana in play to, let's see how high Indiana can go. So that's a story I'm looking for. But on a broader level, with USC losing to Michigan, what that means is, the USC Penn State game in a few weeks on October 12th, that becomes must win for USC.
Yeah.
And if USC had beaten Michigan, then, that Penn State game wouldn't be must win, but now it's definitely must win for the Trojans. So if they don't get it, then they would have to run the table. And you think, they're going to either run into some nasty road Big Ten weather, or the injuries are going to hit and they're going to be shorthanded at some point. That Penn State game now is must win for USC. Oregon definitely improved against Oregon State, but how good is Oregon State? We don't really know that. Oregon State shut out San Diego State on the road, and I think people got excited about that. But San Diego State's bad.
Yeah.
San Diego State is a bad team so far. Sean Lewis with a real rebuild there. So we haven't learned a whole lot about the Big Ten. Like these teams still have to go up against each other. And when I say these teams, I mean like the top 5 or 6 teams. They need to lock horns the way USC and Michigan did. We need to have more of those kinds of games, and we'll get them.
And they're coming.
We'll get them in the next few weeks. But Wisconsin has a backup quarterback, Tyler Van Dyke, out. We're not going to learn anything from USC, Wisconsin. USC is going to win that game comfortably, and we're not really going to learn anything about those two teams. But October 12th, Ohio State, Oregon, USC, Penn State. So we'll know a lot more about the Big Ten.
And I think it's Texas, Oklahoma that day. So October 12th, a big day of national games. A lot of big games.
Ole Miss, LSU. Yep. Yes, tons of huge ones on that day.
Here's a narrative for you on the first 4 weeks. Again, after week 1, we thought Clemson was dead and buried. Now they've some nice resurgence. The other teams in the ACC, Virginia Tech has collapsed. Florida State's bad. Now I think there's an opportunity here for Clemson and Miami to potentially get 2 bids out of the ACC, where after week 1, we thought that was probably maybe a 1-bid league. Maybe if Florida State got it together, maybe 2. But it looks like Clemson has kind of got it together there a little bit with the offense and Klubnik. I think it's Miami and Clemson the clear 1-2 in the ACC.
I'm shocked by how bad North Carolina State has been. I was expecting so much more. And like Grayson McCall, he was so good at Coastal Carolina. I thought North Carolina State was a great landing spot. And we've seen so many teams, Mike Norvell, Florida State, Hugh Freeze, Auburn, completely swing and miss with their quarterback situations. Not that's been a big theme
Transfer
of the
portal,
season.
all these transfer
Transfer
portal
portal and
guys.
just
Yeah.
generally like being aware of what you have and knowing that you need to upgrade over that. So North Carolina State seemed to have done a really good job with Grayson McCall. Hasn't materialized. So I'm really surprised there. And I would add
Vautech.
Louisville. I
Will,
would
yeah.
add Louisville to the
Okay.
conversation in the ACC. I really think it's a three-horse race at this point. It's Clemson, Miami, Louisville, those three teams fighting for two spots in Charlotte. It's going to be really interesting. And remember, Jeff Brom a year ago, he won 10 games with Jack Plummer
Right.
as his quarterback. Tyler Shuck isn't a great quarterback by any means, but I think he's better than Jack Plummer. So for that reason alone, Louisville has to be part of the mix and part of the conversation in the ACC. But if you were to say Miami Clemson right now, couldn't really argue with that because Cam Ward looks electric. Miami can really put it on people now. And what's been the knock on Mario Cristobal over the years? He gets in the way of his quarterbacks, right? Like he had Justin Herbert throwing dump offs and check
Right.
downs at Oregon. But Cam Ward, he's the real deal. He's getting it and he's getting great protection from a Cristobal offensive line. So yeah, Miami's definitely putting it together so far.
Yeah, I saw Cam Ward in person Saturday night against USF down here, and you're right. I mean, USF's decent. They're not great, but they were competitive for a half. But boy, Cam Ward is the difference maker there. And they got receivers now that the old Miami receivers, they got a couple of guys that can play. They got a good offensive line where they can run the ball with Damian Martinez, who I know you know well. So I think Miami is unless they just collapse or Ward gets hurt, I think Miami's a shoe-in for the ACC title game. To me, you make a good point. Louisville Clemson is probably the battle for the second spot there in the ACC to get to the title game. All right, Big 12. Utah looks to be a one bid league. I don't Utah with a big win at Oklahoma State. No Cam Rising. We think he's going to be back at some point, whether it's this week, next week. But boy, Utah just continues to win these kind of rock fight kind of games. What a coach Whittingham is, and boy, he can win any style of play you need to play. He seems like they can get the Utah team ready to play.
I think a key point is that, now that Utah is no longer in the Pac-12, you don't have to go up against Kalen DeBoer in Washington. Of course, Kalen DeBoer now at Alabama, but like Kalen DeBoer at Washington, like he turned Washington into a heavyweight. You don't have to deal with Dan Lanning in Oregon. You don't have to deal with Lincoln Riley and USC. You don't have those top end offenses in the Big 12. It's really a great fit for Utah and its physical punishing style. And of course, the Big 12 doesn't have Texas and Oklahoma anymore. So you don't have Texas, Oklahoma. You don't have Washington, Oregon, USC. Like what Utah figured to be the ruler of the new Big 12, and it's exactly how it's played out. And this week we have Arizona at Utah. And like Yogi Berra was fond of saying, referring to World Series day games at Yankee Stadium, it gets late early out there. The early shadows creep over the field earlier in the day than they do in July. So it's getting late early for Arizona. Arizona got boat raced at Kansas State.
Yeah.
Been a very choppy, uneven start for first-year coach Brent Brennan. When you had Fafita and McMillan, the star quarterback and the star receiver coming back, they didn't go to Seattle to play for Jed Fish. They stayed in Tucson, and you're thinking, okay, Arizona still has the high-end weapons to be a real factor in the Big 12. Well, already got kicked in the butt by Kansas State. If Arizona loses to Utah and doesn't put up, too much of a fight, I mean, season's basically over for Arizona in terms of its major aspirations. So obviously, it's a chance for Utah to take even more complete control of the Big 12, but it's also the bigger story is it's already kind of a last chance type game for Arizona, and we're not even in October yet.
Yeah, Kansas State with a loss at BYU over the weekend kind of derailed that. Oklahoma State obviously losing to Utah. Colorado, they're not going to be in the contention for the top of that league. A team like UCF, big game against Colorado this week. They have both Utah and BYU in their building as well as Colorado. I know Gus Malzahn thinks he's got a pretty good team with the running back and KJ Jefferson. Could UCF kind of be that sleeper team in the Big 12?
I mean, they got through that TCU game and they were down 21 points in that game. I mean, when you pull out a road win, even though TCU is not all that
Right.
great, still, but just coming back from 21 on the road against anybody, that's going to create confidence and belief in the locker room. So, like that. And the thing with Gus, like we know this with Gus Malzahn teams, they're erratic, they're volatile, but every few years, everything seems to come
Right.
together for a
Right.
Gus team. Like usually Gus exasperates the heck out of you. Usually his coaching is all over the map. Usually his teams fumble and stumble and they give away several games per season that they have no business losing. But then once every 3, 4 years, like we saw it at Auburn, right?
Yep.
Yeah, 2013, then fool around and fail for 3 years, but then what? 2017, everything came together
Right.
again.
Right.
So like that's Gus. He's enigmatic, but within that enigmatic reality is that once every 4 or 5 years, he puts it all together. And maybe this is what's happening in 2024 with the Knights.
And the schedule's good. They got again BYU and
Yeah.
Utah in their house, Colorado here. They don't play Kansas State or Oklahoma State on the schedule. So if they can, even if they were to split with Utah and BYU, they could be in the Big 12 title game very easily. And you're right, that Orlando's a tough place to play. That's a very raucous stadium. I've been there before when it's been a big game. That's a pretty electric stadium when they get it going there. And they got a veteran quarterback. They got a really good running back, R.J. Harvey, who's potentially an All-American. So be careful. Keep an eye on Central Florida if they can play a little bit of defense. All right, let's get to the big boy conference, the SEC. Obviously, we got the huge showdown, Bama and Georgia this week. But for me, the most impressive team through 4 weeks has been Tennessee. Going to Norman to beat Oklahoma like they did. They throttled NC State, who you mentioned earlier. I know Georgia beat Clemson good early in the season, but boy, this Tennessee defense is really going to allow this Tennessee team with Nico at the quarterback spot, the way they run the ball, good coaching by Heupel. I think Tennessee is a super, super dangerous team here.
We remember what Tennessee looked like in 2022 with Hendon Hooker. And this team seems to have a better defense than that 2022 squad has, but it still has that high end upside on offense with Nico Yamaleava at quarterback. Like
Can you
he's
spell that
carrying the
for?
torch
Can you
from
spell that for the audience?
Iamaleava.
There you go. That a boy.
Yeah. So it seems as though Tennessee has all of the offensive firepower of 2 years ago, but with an even better defense. Now, word of caution, Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma has been a disaster.
Yeah.
And Brent Venables put all his chips in the middle of the table with Jackson Arnold, and that's not working out. They've benched him for Oklahoma's coming game against Auburn. So a little bit of a word of caution for Tennessee there. And also, North Carolina State getting boat raced at Clemson. That kind of tells you that Tennessee crushing NC State, while obviously a really good performance, let's not assign
Right.
too much weight just yet. But Tennessee does look the part, no question about that. The Vols look basically like 2022 and maybe a little bit better. So Josh Heupel has that program headed for the playoff. Like it's like Tennessee should be able to get through its schedule at least at 10-2, and if you're getting through an SEC schedule at 10-2, you're making the playoff. I think the other interesting story in the SEC while we're talking about this, what is the real Missouri? Is
Right.
the real Missouri going to show up in the future, or is that what we've seen the past few weeks, just barely
Getting
squeaking
by.
by
Yep. Yep.
Boston College and Vanderbilt at home? So is Missouri going to be like an 8-4 team that's just average and basically can't really separate from opponents? Is that what the Boston College and Vanderbilt games have taught us about Missouri? Or are we going to see this team shift into high gear and become great, as many people thought it could be? Missouri entered with a preseason top 10 ranking and hasn't played like it. But just because you struggle in September, that doesn't mean that's how it's going to be in October, November. But Missouri definitely has to raise the bar several notches. And like if we're going to compare, the SEC teams that came into the year with a lot of hype but needed to kind of prove they were worthy of the hype, Ole Miss has looked much more like
Yes.
an elite team than Missouri has. If you're just going to compare those two schools, neither
Have
Ole
played
Miss
anybody.
Missouri, like they're not part of the big boy club. They're not Tennessee, they're not Alabama, they're not Georgia, they're not LSU. Like they haven't resided at the top of the SEC on a consistent basis the way those other schools have. But if you're going to compare those two schools through 4 weeks, Ole Miss has definitely looked the part a lot more like a lot more than Missouri. And remember the thing about Ole Miss hasn't yet played in the SEC championship game
Yep.
ever. The SEC title game began in 1992. Ole Miss has never been there. Missouri has. Missouri made those 2 appearances under Gary Pinkel
Yep.
a decade ago. Ole Miss has never been there. And so Ole Miss, obviously, you want to make the playoff, but you don't want to go through this season not going to Atlanta because this is the chance. Ole Miss has never had a better chance. If Ole Miss fails to go to Atlanta, it's a big failure for the Rebels this season. But so far, they look the part.
And Ole Miss and Missouri have pretty soft schedules. They got a couple tough games. Ole Miss plays at LSU in a couple weeks and Georgia down the road. But they avoid Tennessee. They avoid Alabama. Missouri's got a pretty soft schedule too. So, it's gonna be those two teams might be vying for the final wild card spot of the at-large teams in the whole thing because of their soft schedules and how they play against each other. How they play in conference.
And Jason, you've brought something up. Those might be the final two teams battling for the last at-large bid. In this new 12-team playoff era. Let me just introduce an idea because you've reminded me of that. In the future, like this week, it's not going to happen this year, and it's probably not going to happen next year. But maybe it happens in 2026 when the new television contract for the playoff gets going. This is something the power conferences need to do, and the SEC is the perfect example. Conference championship games in the 12-team playoff era need a complete rethink. This needs to be overhauled, Jason. And here's the idea. Let's say Alabama and Georgia are playing this week. So the loser goes 11-1, the winner goes 12-0. So they would play under the current system, they would play in the SEC championship game, just the way it's normally been
Plus you
done.
Got Texas. Well, we got Texas.
You also have Texas. So yeah, it's just basically you have two 11-1 teams or an 11-1 team against a 12-0 team. That's currently how it goes in the top conferences. But in the 12-team playoff era, we should no longer be doing that. We should give that 12-0 team, let's say 12-0 Texas, 11-1 Georgia, 11-1 Alabama, whoever it is, they shouldn't be playing in the SEC championship game anymore. Not with 12 teams in the playoff. With 4 in the playoff, yes. But now that we have 12, there is no point in having 2 teams that are guaranteed to be in the playoff, making them play an extra game. They would much rather prefer a week of rest before their playoff game, whether it's a first-round game or a quarterfinal. Give them that game off. Why subject them to possible injuries?
I know where you're going here, Matt Zemek.
That's right.
I know where you're going.
Yeah. So when you said Ole Miss and Missouri could be like the battle for the last 2 teams,
steel cage death match, loser leaves town.
But you have the SEC championship game on that same Saturday in December with all the television rights intact. Like you don't touch anything about that. You're still playing the game at the same scheduled time on the same scheduled network, but it should be the last 2 teams fighting for a playoff berth. It should be basically your 4 versus 5 or your 3 versus 4, whichever it is. That's the change that all of the power conferences need to make. Like if you have one team that's guaranteed to be in the playoff or 2 teams that are guaranteed to be in the playoff, you should have your championship game become a play-in game.
Very similar to the NCAA tournament in Dayton. Like you're in Dayton in the NCAA tournament.
Yes, only it's in Atlanta, Indianapolis,
Charlotte.
Charlotte, exactly. So that change needs to happen in the 12-team playoff era.
That's a good thought. I like that. That's a good thought. A little steel cage death match. Loser leave town. All right, a couple more things. We'll get you out of here. Let's talk a little Alabama, Georgia. Obviously, the showdown game. I'm going to make the argument this is a bigger game for Georgia than Alabama because Georgia's road schedule in conference at Texas, at Ole Miss down the road. If they were to lose all 3 road games, including the Alabama game, I don't think they're getting in with 3 losses if you lose all 3 on the road. So to me, this is a bigger game for Georgia than it is necessarily Alabama. You know Kalen DeBoer very well from his days at Washington and what he's done the last couple of years in the Pac-12. Give me a couple of things schematically that DeBoer can do to Kirby Smart in that defense. You know, the Georgia offense has not been great so far this year, so we figure this to probably be a lower scoring game. Give me a couple schematic things that DeBoer can do to the Georgia defense that could allow Alabama to win this game.
Well, remember a few years ago, Georgia went to Alabama, and we saw, Jalen Waddle and the other Bama receivers making big plays down the field against Georgia's defense. And really, whether we're talking about a Nick Saban defense or a Kirby Smart defense, the way you beat those defenses, you don't grind them down 14 plays, 75 yards, 7 minutes. You hit them over the top with the long ball. And Kalen DeBoer's offenses, we saw this with Michael Penix at
Mm-hmm.
Washington. He's going to take deep shots down the field. I think it's really the kind of scheme, the kind of approach that's good. That's a good matchup for Alabama against Georgia, like stylistically and in terms philosophically. Like this is how you should attack a Kirby Smart defense. And so, Jalen Milroe getting, coaching from Kalen DeBoer, I think that he'll be ready to hit some deep balls down the field. And this then turns the conversation to, Georgia was able to win shootouts under Stetson Bennett. We saw that in the Peach Bowl most memorably against Ohio State, the
Right.
playoff semifinals. Georgia's defense got shredded by C.J. Stroud, but Stetson Bennett was able to keep up. He was able to keep pace. Can Carson Beck win that kind of game? We have not seen that yet. We didn't see it last year. That really becomes the question. If Alabama puts its marker down, scores 35 points, can Carson Beck win? That to me is the big question.
On
Like
the
we know
road too,
Georgia can
in
win
Tuscaloosa.
in Tuscaloosa. Like we know that Georgia can win the slugfest. That's how Kirby Smart loves it. That's how he wants football to be played. But is Georgia under Carson Beck able to win a shootout? Because Stetson Bennett could win that game. We haven't seen Carson Beck win that kind of game. So if I'm Alabama, like I want the shootout, and I'm gonna say, hey, we're gonna go for it. Kirby, Carson, can you keep up? I think that's how Alabama wants to frame it. And I would say that, based on what we saw from Georgia against Kentucky, I don't think that Georgia offense is ready if Alabama puts up at least 30, 35 points. So I'm going to give Alabama the edge in this one. I think that Kalen DeBoer is going to have Milroe ready to play and ready to hit the deep shots that you get in a Kalen DeBoer offensive scheme.
Remember, both these teams coming off a bye week, so they've had 2 weeks to prepare, get healthy. To me, the matchup in this game that will show you quickly where this game may go. Can the Alabama front five offensive line, can they block the Georgia front seven? Alabama struggled mightily against South Florida. They played a Wisconsin team was not very good. To me, with 2 weeks to get ready, can Alabama block, protect Milroe to give him the time to let those deeper routes develop? Remember, you got Ryan Williams, the freshman 17-year-old speedster for Alabama, but those routes take time to run those double moves and those deep crossing routes, things like that. Can the Alabama front five, offensive line protect the Georgia, block the Georgia front seven? To me, that'll be a key early in this game to give DeBoer and company. And I think you're going to see a better Georgia team. I think offensively, I think Beck's, they had their struggle against Kentucky. I get it, but I think Beck's pretty good. And again, can Beck score 24 to 28 points in Tuscaloosa? If they can, I think Georgia's going to win the game, but we will. But again, you make great points about DeBoer liking to throw the ball over. You're right. You're not going to go 12, 13 plays, 80 yards on Georgia very often.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that the Alabama offensive line versus the Georgia defensive front, that is the centerpiece of the whole thing.
All right, last thing I'll get you out of here. Let's talk about a couple coaching situations that are getting a little warm, if not really hot. I'll give you three places and give me a thought there. And if you have any others, give me a thought. Florida, Virginia Tech, Auburn.
Okay, Napier's not going to survive the season. I'm fully convinced of that.
Is it
Yeah,
Lane, real quick,
Virginia.
is it Lane Kiffin's job to lose? Or do you think
It's going to be Lane Kiffin's job to turn down. I
okay,
don't think Lane. I kind of think Lane likes it at Ole Miss, but I think he'll be the Florida's first call, and it will be his job to turn down. It will be up to Lane Kiffin to decide. Yeah, so I think that's where it's going. Yeah, Virginia Tech should be very concerned that Brent Pry hasn't turned things around. But, Justin Fuente couldn't solve that. So I'm not sure Brent Pry is done this year. I think he might get one more year to see what he can do.
Right.
But certainly, like he's coached his way into a situation where 2025 is going to be his last year if he can't figure things out. With Hugh Freeze, I just don't understand. Why didn't he upgrade from Peyton Thorne at quarterback? Like, what was Hugh Freeze doing this offseason? I don't get it. So, like, he's torched this season, but Auburn's not going to fire him this year because he's beaten Nick Saban multiple times. I know Saban's retired, but like Hugh Freeze has accomplished too much in the SEC for him to be canned this year. To me, the other coach that's already gone basically is just a dead coach walking along with Napier, Dave Aranda at Baylor.
Wow.
And it's not just that he isn't doing a good job overall, but he didn't have his Baylor defense playing center field on that Colorado Hail Mary. The Baylor defenders were scrambling back to get in position. They should have just been on the goal line playing center field.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing that gets a coach on the hot seat fired. Like it was 50-50 as to whether Aranda was going to be brought back for this year at Baylor. He is toast. He's done. Like that's Baylor is going to have a new coach next year. That seems pretty certain. And the other thing I'd add is that, if UCLA, which wasn't terrible against LSU, actually was more competitive than I thought they would be, but still, you look at UCLA's schedule, where's UCLA getting anything more than 3 wins? Yeah. Like UCLA seems almost certain to be 3-9 at best, probably 2-10. Could lose out and be 1-11. If UCLA is 3-9, then Deshaun Foster is coaching for his job next year. He's not going to get fired after 1 year, but he's already in a position, kind of like Brent Pry at Virginia Tech, where if things do not improve in 2025, that coaching tenure is done, and they're going to start fresh in 2026.
One more spot to keep an eye on is West Virginia. They've struggled, probably make a change there with Neil Brown. Big 12, they've lost some games they shouldn't have lost. They lost Pitt. They lost to who'd they play early in the year? They got beat Penn State. Penn State
yep.
rolled them early in the year.
Beat them big. Yep.
2 names I'm gonna throw out there to keep an eye on. It would not shock me if both guys get a job next year. John Gruden, Pat Fitzgerald.
Well, Gruden has said he wants into the college game, so you would think that someone's going to give him a chance.
Florida or an Auburn. If Lane says no,
if Lane Kiffin says no, Gruden being Florida's number 2 choice makes a whole lot of sense.
Yep, and keep an eye on again. I think a guy that I don't know all the details of what's going on with his lawsuit, but Pat Fitzgerald has been out of coaching a couple of years now. Again, I don't know all the details of what's going on with that, but that's a name, good coach, good reputation for the most part. Keep an eye on a guy like Pat Fitzgerald to get back in if his lawsuit situation is not so toxic that he can't.
Got to mention one other name, Sam Pittman.
Yes.
Sam Pittman is beat Auburn, but the Oklahoma State game could still really hurt him before everything's done. Obviously, that seat cooled with the Auburn win, but he still has a lot of work to do at Arkansas to make sure that he gets off the hot seat because he's not off.
If he could beat A&M this week, that would help a bunch.
That would go a long way. Yes,
that would help, and that's a winnable game. That's a winnable game in Dallas against A&M. So keep an eye on, Sam.
But he's definitely coaching for his job right now, and like a 3-game losing streak, he becomes roast pork with the Razorbacks.
I don't think so because of the buyout. Norvell's not getting fired because they owe him a ton of money. Any chance that a guy like Dabo could potentially leave Clemson just because of the wearing it out? Just being there too long factor, not necessarily for performance, just he's been there for 17, 18 years.
To me, the only job that Dabo would leave Clemson for is Alabama, and that's now secured with DeBoer. So I think there's no place that Dabo's going to leap for in my mind.
Unless they collapse down the stretch here for some reason, yeah. All right, Matt Zemek, great work, man. Get off my pylon podcast. The USA Today Trojan Wire, find him online. He does a lot of great stuff. Three Dog Thursday, he gives you some previews every week of some games. Check that out, the 3 Dog Thursday website. Does great work with our guy TJ Reeves. Any other stuff that we need to talk about? Voice of College Football with Mark Rogers. Where else can we find you, man?
Yeah, so I'm on the USC channel with the Voice of College Football with Mark Rogers. That's a YouTube show. So just type in USC Voice of College Football on YouTube. Multiple shows per week there. I'm covering, Pac-12 realignment stupidity over at Trojans Wire, along with USC football. And you want to follow Badgers Wire this week because it's USC Wisconsin. So read Badgers Wire in addition to Trojans Wire. But hey, get off my pylon and part of the College Gridiron Coast to Coast podcast network that you're a part of. Like, those are things you podcasts you definitely want to listen to during each week of the college football season.
And hoop season starting at Eric Musselman year one at USC's underway here. I've been seeing some basketball clips and online and stuff. So hoops season is right around the corner with Eric Musselman and company out at USC.
Juju, don't forget Juju Watkins.
That's right. Juju Watkins on USC the women's side.
USC better be in the Final Four next spring. I'm just going to say that much.
But yeah, she'll be the next Caitlin Clark, getting all the attention and all that good stuff. Well, Matt Zemek, great work, man. Keep it up. We'll be in touch as we move through the college football season, and we'll talk real soon.
Always great to be on your show, Jason. Thank you.